Now we're going to tie a Harrop's hair wing dun. This is a little mayfly imitation that's a really delicate, slow water type of pattern, but it's got enough surface area and some hair on it so it floats really well even in rougher water. You can change the colors of this fly to match any mayfly, and that's one of the coolest things about flies like this is just by changing the colors you can match a lot of different bugs. We're going to start off with a Tiemco 100 down-eye dry fly hook. In this case, we're going to tie a pale morning dun version, so we're going to use some light Cahill colored 8/0 thread, medium blue dun spade hackle for the tail, some pale yellow superfine dubbing for the body and the thorax, a medium blue dun hackle for the hackle, and some bleached deer hawk for the wing. Now you could use bleached deer hawk or bleached elk. Either one is fine depending on the size of the fly. I find the deer hawk's a little finer and more appropriate in the smaller sizes that I tend to tie this fly in. I'm going to start my thread about midpoint or so on the hook. I'm going to run back to the bend. And once I get there, I'm going to make just a little nub of thread, and this is going to help flare the tail out a bit. So I've just stacked 5 or 6 turns of thread right there at the bend of the hook. And I'll come in with my spade hackle feather and pick out a half dozen or so fibers. I try to keep this fly relatively sparse. I'm going to take this clump and I'm going to tie it in at the bend just in front of that nub. I'll run the thread forward over the butt ends, and now I can come in and dub the abdomen. I'm going to take a very small amount of dubbing here to do this. It's not going to take much. I'm going to put on a very thin layer. I'm going to work my thread back to the bend. Trying to get that first turn of dubbing right at the base of the tail, and then I'll work forward from there up to about the 70% point or so. And I want a slight taper as I go, but not a real pronounced one. I want to try to keep this relatively delicate to start with. Now I'm going to take my hackle feather, and I've measured this against the hook, so it's about 1.5 times the hook gap. And I'm measuring that over the top of the dubbing. I'm going to prep that feather by trimming the bottom off and stripping off a few fibers from the base of the feather so I've got some exposed stem. I'm going to overlap just the very front edge of the abdomen there and tie that feather in right on top of the front edge of the abdomen. I'm going to add another little pinch of dubbing. And I'm going to twist this down onto the thread. And in this case, I'm going to start this dubbing just behind our index point and overlap onto the front edge of the abdomen and then kind of continue the thickest point of the abdomen forward for the thorax, like so. I'm going to grab this short little feather in my hackle pliers, and I'm going to palmer wrap it just with evenly spaced turns, 3 or 4 turns over that dubbed thorax, lift it up at the front of the hook and tie it off with a couple turns of thread. I'll trim off the stem of that feather. And we're going to build a nice smooth thread base there behind the eye. Now for the wing, I'm going to take a small clump of this bleached deer hawk, a much smaller clump than I'll use on a lot of other patterns, because the hackle is going to be what's going to create most of the surface area on this fly. This wing is going to create a wing silhouette and add just a bit of flotation. So I'm going to put this into my small stacker and stack it up nice and clean. I'm going to thin this bunch down just a touch. And I'll measure this clump of hair against the hook shank. I want it a shank length long. So when I lay it up here to measure it, I'll use my fingernail to mark the back edge here. So I'm lined up at exactly 1 shank length. I'll take this hair and transfer it to my other hand. And I'm going to trim it off right at the outside edge of where I mark the hair. And I try to get that cut as straight up and down as I can, so it's as perpendicular to the hair as I can get it. Now I'm going to spin my thread up a bit so it'll bite into this hair. This A-dot thread is really round, and when I spin it, it gets even more round. And this is going to help this hair to flare a little bit. So I'm going to set this hair in on top of the hook with the butt ends just behind the hook eye. Then I'm going to work forward through those butt ends right up to the back edge of the hook eye. You can see that wing is tied in on top of the hook now, but it's flared a little more upright than it would be on a caddis style pattern. Now I'm going to whip finish just behind the eye, and I'll show you how you can trim the hackle down if need be. This is another one of those flies that you can trim the hackle flat across the bottom or in a V-notch to set the fly a little lower on the water. I don't typically do that until I get out on the water because it gives me a little more variable to it. But to trim the hackle flat, I'm just going to lay the scissors right square across the bottom of the fly and make a straight cut with a sharp pair of scissors. And that'll set the fly down a little lower in the surface film, so the body will sit down and make a little more indentation. The wing is up where you can see it and the fish can see it, and it'll provide a lot of flotation across the top of the fly.